The train had been gone 3 days when Silas Vale found the woman beneath the red cliffs, and the first thing she did was lift his rifle from the snow and point it at his heart. "Take one more step," she said, "and I will spend the last cartridge on you." Her voice was cracked with cold. Her gloves were gone. Blood darkened the hem of her gray traveling dress, and one bare hand trembled around the rifle stock. Yet she held the barrel steady enough to make Silas stop. Behind him, the wind worried the cottonwood branches along the frozen creek. Ahead of him, the woman crouched beside a broken wagon tongue, with a small leather valise pressed against her ribs, as if it contained the last warm thing in the world. Silas had been waiting for his bride at the station in Laramie for 2 evenings. The letter in his coat said she would arrive on the westbound train, carrying a blue ribbon and a photograph of herself. The train had come. The passengers had left. No woman with a blue ribbon had stepped down. Now he had found her 12 miles north of the line, alone in a wilderness no sensible traveler entered in December. Before we go further, settle in wherever you are tonight. Let us know in the comments where you are listening from. There is comfort in knowing how many faraway homes can share one fire for the length of a story. Silas kept his hands where she could see them. "I am not here to take anything from you. You are wearing a gun. So are half the men in Wyoming. Half the men in Wyoming did not find me hiding behind a dead horse." He looked at the animal. The mare lay stiff beneath a crust of snow, her harness cut clean through. The wagon stood 30 yards away, one wheel shattered. There were no tracks leading from it except a single line of boot prints disappearing toward the cliffs. Silas followed those prints with his eyes. They were small, uneven, and made by someone carrying weight. The woman had walked through the night. "What happened to the driver?" he asked. "Which one?" That answer struck him harder than the cold. He took off his wool coat and laid it on the snow between them. "Put this on. I do not need charity." "No, you need a coat." Her eyes flicked toward the garment, then back to him. Something in her face had been taught to distrust every kindness before it arrived. Silas stepped away. He knew how to approach frightened horses, wounded dogs, and men who had been cornered by their own shame. The rule was the same. Give fear a road out. The woman lowered the rifle a fraction. "Who sent you?" she asked. "Myself." "That is not an answer. It is the one I have." A pale sun slid behind the cliffs. The temperature dropped with it. Silas heard ice ticking in the creek and smelled the bitter iron of the mare's blood. At last the woman dragged the coat toward herself with the rifle barrel. She wrapped it around her shoulders, but did not put down the gun. "My name is Mara Ellery." Silas felt the name settle into the space between them. "Mara," he said, "I am Silas Vale." Her expression changed. Not relief. Recognition. "You are the man from the advertisement." "I placed it." "The widower with a ranch north of Laramie." "Yes. The man who wanted a wife to keep house and bear children." Silas looked toward the broken wagon. "That is what the paper said." "And you waited for me?" "I did." "Why?" He could have told her the truth. He could have said the house had been silent since his wife died, and silence had begun to sound like an accusation. He could have said he had built a second bedroom with his own hands, and had not known until it stood empty how much hope he had placed inside it. Instead he said, "Because I gave my word." Mara studied him as though a promise were a rare animal she had never seen alive. Then a gunshot cracked from the cliffs. The rifle jumped in her hands. Silas moved before he thought. He crossed the snow, knocked the barrel toward the sky, and pulled her behind the wagon tongue as a second shot struck the frozen creek. "Who is shooting?" "You said you came alone." "I did." "Then why are they hunting you?" Mara's lips parted. For the first time, the hardness left her face and fear showed through. "They are not hunting me," she whispered. "They are hunting what I know." Silas looked at the valise against her chest. Far above them, a horse screamed. Then 3 riders appeared along the ridge, black against the dying light. The woman pressed closer to the broken wagon. "If they take me, they will burn the valley before spring." Silas had come to Laramie expecting a stranger with a blue ribbon. He had found a hunted woman, a dead driver, and a secret large enough to bring armed men into the wilderness. He lifted his rifle. "Can you walk?" "I walked here." "Can you keep walking?" Mara looked once at the riders and once at the road leading south, the road that could carry her toward the railway, the law, and a chance to disappear. "No," she said, "not toward town." Silas saw the choice in her face before she spoke it. "Then we go north," he said. The north trail led into country where the snow lay deep beneath the pines and no deputy would find them before morning. It also led toward his ranch, his empty house, and the life he had promised a woman who had never arrived. He took the rifle from her only after she let him. Together, they left the broken wagon behind. They had gone less than a mile when Mara stumbled. Silas caught her elbow. She pulled away so sharply that the leather valise fell into the snow. He saw the blue ribbon then, tied around its handle. "You were carrying it," he said. "I was carrying proof." "Proof of what?" She retrieved the valise and held it close. "That a man can sign his name to murder and still sleep beneath a clean roof." Silas watched the riders move along the ridge behind them. They had not followed down yet. They were waiting for darkness. His ranch was 8 miles north. The cabin had a stout door, a spring house, a barn, and a narrow ravine behind it where a person could hide until dawn. It was not a fortress. It had never needed to be. Now Mara was asking him to place a hunted secret beneath his roof. He thought of the empty bedroom. He thought of his dead wife, Ruth, who had once told him that a man did not prove his character by protecting his home from trouble. He proved it by deciding what trouble was worth letting inside. Mara saw his hesitation. "If you mean to hand me over," she said, "do it before we reach your house." "I do not. You do not know me. I know you walk through the snow with no gloves. That proves poor judgment. It proves you had somewhere to be." Her mouth tightened. "My father used to say a woman's courage was only stubbornness wearing a clean dress." Was he right? He was a banker. He believed anything could be owned if the paper was written correctly. Silas looked at the valise. Did he own what is in there? He tried. A branch snapped behind them. Silas raised one hand. Mara froze. The wind had stopped. In the sudden quiet, they heard men speaking on the ridge. "Vale," a voice called. "You have a woman belonging to Mr. Rusk. Bring her down and nobody gets hurt." Silas knew that voice. Hollis Rusk owned the freight contracts between Laramie and the northern settlements. He owned 3 saloons, the biggest cattle herd in the county, and enough men to make a sheriff think twice before knocking on his door. Silas had hauled Rusk's freight once. He remembered the man's smooth hands and pale eyes. Rusk never raised his voice because other people did it for him. Mara whispered, "You know him." "I know of him. He killed my brother." The ridge went quiet again. Silas tightened his grip on the rifle. "Why did you come to me?" "I did not know who else to trust." "That is not an answer." She looked at him then. The cold had reddened her cheeks. A cut above her eyebrow had begun to bleed again. "Your letter said you had lost your wife," she said. "Mine said you understood what it meant to live with an empty place at the table." Silas had written those words. He had not expected them to become a judgment. "I did lose her." "So did I." "Your brother was not your husband." "No." She looked toward the ridge. "But he was the last person in the world who believed me." Outside, a horse moved near the barn. Silas reached for his rifle. Mara caught his wrist. "Not yet." He looked at her hand on him. It was the first time she had touched him without fear. "Why not?" "Because that is not a horse." The sound came again. A careful scrape against the barn door. Silas extinguished the lamp. They stood in the dark, listening. The scrape stopped. A match flared outside and vanished. Then the barn door opened. Silas moved to the rear window. Mara took the knife from his belt and went the other direction. For a woman who had spent her life being told she was helpless, she moved like someone who had been waiting to prove a point. A shadow crossed the window. Silas raised the rifle, but Mara shook her head. 3 men had entered the barn. If he fired, the first shot would announce exactly where they stood. If he waited, they might find the horses, the hay, and the oil lantern hanging beside the stall. The easy choice was to shoot. The hard one was to remain silent while danger moved within 20 feet of the room. Silas pointed toward the back door. Mara understood. They would leave through the ravine, circle behind the barn, and take the men from the dark. He opened the door a finger's width. A voice outside said, "Vale, Rusk wants the woman alive. You are not part of this." Silas closed the door. Mara stared at him. "You heard him." "I did. You can still walk away." "I have walked away once," he said. "I will not do it twice." Mara's eyes softened, but only for a moment. "You do not know what you are promising." "No," he checked the rifle. "I know who I am promising it to." They went out through the springhouse tunnel, a low passage Silas had dug after the creek flooded 2 winters earlier. It opened behind a shelf of stone in the ravine. Snow filled the mouth, and the cold struck their faces like thrown sand. They crawled beneath the pines while voices rose at the cabin. A shot broke the night. Then another. Mara's shoulder pressed against his. Her breath came fast. Are they inside? Not anymore. How do you know? I built the tunnel. That does not explain it. The second shot was fired from the window. She watched him in the darkness. You listened to bullets? I listened to everything. They climbed toward the ridge before dawn. Below them, 3 riders searched the ranch with lanterns. A fourth man remained by the barn, taller than the rest, dressed in a black coat untouched by snow. Hollis Rusk. Mara recognized him from the way she stopped breathing. He came himself, she whispered. Rusk looked toward the ravine as if he could feel their eyes on him. Why? Silas asked. Because he wants the ledger. What ledger? Mara opened the valise. Inside lay a small black book, a packet of letters, and a silver locket broken at the hinge. My brother kept accounts for Rusk, she said. Freight invoices. Land transfers. Payments to men who burned homesteads after Rusk bought the water rights. He has been driving families out of the valley and taking their land for half its value. Why would your brother keep proof? He meant to take it to the territorial marshal. Did he? He got as far as the freight yard. Mara held up the broken locket. Rusk shot him there. Then he told the sheriff my brother had stolen company money and fled. Silas looked down at the ranch. Rusk's men were carrying sacks of grain from the barn. His house was already being stripped. Your father? Refused to believe me. Rusk had his note. He called me a grieving girl with a spiteful imagination. And the advertisement. Mara looked away. It was the only way I could leave Laramie without Rusk knowing where I was going. I wrote to a stranger because a stranger had no reason to sell me. Silas understood the cruelty of it. She had chosen him because his grief looked safer than another man's power. The first light touched the eastern horizon. Rusk's men began climbing the ridge. We need the marshal, Silas said. The territorial marshal is in Cheyenne. That is not impossible. It is if Rusk reaches him first. He owns the stage line. The men reached the bottom of the ridge. Silas handed her the pistol. Can you shoot? Not well. Can you shoot when it matters? I do not know. Then learn before it matters. They found the family 2 miles farther on, sheltering beneath an overhang. A mother, a boy of 6, and an old man with a bandaged head. Rusk's men had taken their horses and burned their fence. The mother recognized Mara. You are Ellery's girl. Yes. Your brother tried to warn us. Mara knelt in the snow. I am sorry. The woman looked at Silas. Is he your husband? No, Mara said. Silas watched her face. The answer sounded less like correction than regret. The woman asked for food. Silas gave them the last of the biscuits. Mara opened the valise and removed one of the letters. If you reach Fort Laramie, she said, give this to the marshal or any officer who will carry it to Cheyenne. The woman stared at the paper. What does it say? It names the families Rusk intends to drive out next. The old man coughed. Then you cannot give it away. Mara placed the letter in his hand. I can if you carry the warning. Silas saw the choice. Every letter made the valise lighter and their proof weaker. Mara was not saving the papers for herself. She was turning them into a chain of witnesses. The woman tucked the letter inside her coat. As they left, Mara said, I thought you would object. To what? You need every piece of evidence. I need people alive enough to give it meaning. She looked at him. You speak like a man who has learned things late. Most important things arrive late. He did not see the smile she tried to hide. They reached a narrow gorge before sunset. The trail crossed a frozen stream beneath a wall of red stone. Silas crouched and studied the snow. 6 riders had passed within the last hour. Mara saw his expression. They caught up. Not yet. Then why are you looking at the trail like it offended you? The lead horse is shod on the left front only. How is that useful? It belongs to Rusk. Silas moved to the mare. He cut the saddle loose, pulled the animal behind a boulder, and rubbed snow across the tracks. Mara whispered, What are you doing? Giving them 2 roads. He led her into the gorge, then climbed a shelf above the trail where the red stone made a natural blind. They waited. The riders entered at dusk. There were 7, not 6. Rusk rode in front. His face was calm, his hat brim dry beneath the shelter of the cliffs. Vale, he called. You have made this tiresome. Silas kept the rifle across his knees. Rusk dismounted. The woman has stolen property. You have interfered with a lawful recovery. Mara's breath brushed Silas's sleeve. He calls my brother property too? Rusk heard her. Your brother was a thief. He kept your books. He kept them badly. You shot him. Rusk smiled without warmth. Grief makes women imaginative. Silas felt Mara's hand close around the pistol. Rusk raised his hand. Silas fired at the lantern beside him. Darkness swallowed the gorge. The first horse reared. A rider shouted. Silas fired again, not at a man, but at the rock above the trail. Stone broke loose and thundered down. Mara pulled the pistol and shot the rope holding a pack mule. The animal bolted across the trail, dragging sacks behind it. Men cursed. Horses kicked. The gorge became noise and shadow. Silas grabbed Mara's hand. Run. They climbed the opposite slope. Bullets struck the stone. One tore through Silas's sleeve. Mara stumbled, and he pulled her up. At the top, a rider rose from behind a boulder. Mara fired. The man fell backward, his rifle sliding into the snow. She stared at the pistol. Her face had gone white. He was going to shoot you, Silas said. I know. You did what mattered. I do not know if I can live with it. Silas looked toward the gorge where Rusk's men were gathering. Living with a thing is not the same as forgiving it. They ran until the red cliffs hid the gunmen. Night came clean and hard. They found shelter in an abandoned line shack, its walls leaning beneath the weight of snow. Silas barred the door. Mara sat on the floor, shaking now that the danger had moved beyond reach. He knelt beside her. Let me see your hand. The pistol had bruised her palm. I killed him, she said. You stopped him. Is that what men call it? It is what a person calls it when the other choice is dying. She looked at him. You have done this before. Yes. How many? Enough to remember their faces. What happened to the first woman you loved? He could have turned away. Instead, he answered. Her name was Ruth. She was ill. I rode for a doctor. I believed I could outrun death if I rode hard enough. Mara lowered her eyes. I came back too late, he said. She died alone. You were trying to save her. I was trying to avoid watching her die. The truth sat between them, plain and ugly. Mara took the broken locket from the valise. My brother died alone too. I was in the street outside the freight office. I heard the shot. I hid behind a stack of crates. Why? Because I was afraid. Most people are. I heard him call my name. I stayed hidden. She opened the locket. Inside was a tiny picture of a boy with dark hair and a crooked smile. I have spent 6 months telling myself I was gathering proof for him. The truth is, I was trying to make my cowardice look useful. Silas reached out and closed the locket in her hand. You came back, he said. I came back after he was dead. You came back. She looked at him, and something in her broke open. I am not asking you to forget what happened, he said. I am asking you to stop using it as a name. Her eyes filled. She did not wipe them. Silas took the blue ribbon from the valise handle and tied it around the torn cuff of his sleeve. I was supposed to wear it when I met you, she said. You met me. Not as I intended. Few worthwhile things arrive as intended. She gave a breath that might have been a laugh. For a while, they listened to the fire struggle in the stove. The shack smelled of old wood, wet wool, and the faint sweetness of the apple Mara had saved in her pocket. She cut it in half and handed him a piece. Silas accepted it. If this story is moving you, you are exactly who we wrote it for. A like and a subscription help us keep making stories where wounded people are allowed to find their way home. Mara leaned her head against the wall. Do you still want a wife? Silas looked at her. I wanted someone who would not be afraid of the quiet. I am afraid of many things. So am I. That is not the same as wanting them. No. She turned the apple slice in her fingers. What if I am not the woman from your letter? I have read your letters. You have not. I read the one you sent. I wrote that woman for a stranger. Then let the stranger meet the real one. Mara looked toward the barred door. The real one is tired. She has a dead brother, a father who would not believe her, and a man behind us who will not stop until she is silent. Silas laid his hand beside hers on the floor, not touching. Then let her be tired, he said. She has carried enough for one lifetime. Mara's fingers moved across the boards until they rested against his. The danger remained outside. The cold remained. Rusk still held the town, the sheriff, the freight line, and the road to every place where law might listen. But in that shack, with half an apple between them, Mara stopped looking at Silas as a door she might have to escape through. She began to look at him as a place she might rest. Then the front door opened. Hollis Rusk stepped inside with 3 armed men and Sheriff Calloway behind him. The sheriff's mustache was damp with snow. He kept one hand on his belt and the other pressed against a small brass button on his coat, rubbing it with his thumb. Rusk removed his gloves. "You have made a mistake, Vale." Mara stood. "No. We made a record." Rusk glanced at the ledger. "Paper burns. So do men," she said. But ashes still tell where they stood. Silas felt the room narrow around them. Rusk had planned this. He had reached Fort Laramie before the marshal's reply. He had brought the sheriff because law, in his hands, was another weapon. "Hand over the book," Calloway said. Abel's thumb hovered over the telegraph key. Rusk smiled. "Do not make this difficult." Silas looked at the operator. Abel's hand trembled, but he did not move away from the key. Mara's voice was quiet. "Ask him why my brother's name is in the book." Calloway rubbed the brass button faster. Rusk's eyes went flat. "Your brother stole from me." "Then why did you pay the sheriff to call it an accident?" Calloway stopped rubbing the button. Rusk turned toward him. "Do not let grief make you foolish, Sheriff." Mara opened the broken locket and removed a folded scrap hidden beneath the picture. "My brother wrote down every payment he could not enter in the ledger, including yours." Calloway stared at the paper. Rusk drew his pistol. Silas moved between him and Mara. "Step aside," Rusk said. "No. I can kill you and call it self-defense. You can call it anything you like." Rusk's smile returned. "You think a telegram will save you?" "No," Silas said. "I think your own handwriting might." He lifted the back pages of the ledger. Rusk had signed the freight transfers himself. His signature appeared beside each payment, smooth and unmistakable. Silas had noticed it because he listened to paper the way he listened to tracks. The ink on the newer pages had been pressed harder, written by a man growing careless beneath confidence. Rusk's pistol shifted toward the book. Silas had been waiting for that movement since the moment he saw the man enter. He kicked the stove door open. Flame rushed across the floor where spilled lamp oil had been waiting beneath the desk. Abel seized the telegraph wire and pulled the key free. Mara grabbed the ledger. Sheriff Calloway ducked as Rusk fired. The shot shattered the window. Silas struck Rusk's wrist with the rifle barrel. The pistol fell. One gunman rushed from the wall. Mara swung the ledger into his face. Abel slammed the telegraph key against the man's hand, and the gunman cried out. Calloway drew his revolver, but aimed at Rusk. Rusk shoved Silas into the desk and ran for the door. Mara followed. Outside, the clear sky made every movement sharp. Rusk mounted the nearest horse and spurred toward the old parade ground. The other men scattered. Silas came after him on foot. He could hear the horse, the iron shoes striking frozen earth, the uneven rhythm of Rusk's breathing. The man rode hard, but his horse favored the left front hoof. The shod horse. Silas cut across the parade ground, not chasing the rider, but reading where he would go. Rusk was heading for the river crossing, where the ice had been thickened by shade. The horse would avoid the broken drift near the eastern bank. Silas reached the bank first. Rusk saw him and fired from the saddle. The shot missed. The horse stepped onto the ice. It cracked. Rusk pulled the reins. The animal reared. One front leg plunged through the surface, and Rusk fell into the freezing water. Silas dropped his rifle and crawled across the bank. Rusk clung to the ice. His face had lost its calm. "Help me," he gasped. For one breath, Silas saw Ruth in his mind, not dying but waiting. He saw the road he had chosen. He saw Mara hiding behind crates while her brother called her name. He reached for Rusk. Mara seized the back of his coat. "Do not go farther. I can pull him out. The ice will take you too." Rusk clawed at the edge. "Vale." Silas looked at the line of stones along the bank. A fallen cottonwood lay half-buried near the reeds. He crawled to it, cut the rope from Rusk's saddle with his knife, and tied it around the trunk. He threw the other end across the ice. "Wrap it around your arm," he ordered. Rusk did not move. "Do it." The man obeyed. Silas and Mara hauled together. The rope went taut. Rusk slid across the ice until his hands reached the bank. Silas caught his coat and pulled him free. Rusk collapsed in the snow, coughing black water. "You saved me," he whispered. "No," Silas said. "I refuse to become you." Behind them, Sheriff Calloway approached with Abel and 2 soldiers from the post. The telegraph reply had come while they fought. The territorial marshal was on his way from Cheyenne with a warrant, and the federal district attorney had ordered Rusk's arrest pending investigation. But the arrest was not what defeated him. It was the ledger copied into 3 telegrams, the families named as witnesses, the sheriff's payment written in his own hand, and Mara standing alive before the men who had called her imagination. Calloway took the revolver from Rusk's belt. His thumb no longer rubbed the brass button. "I was paid to look away," he said. Mara held out the scrap from the locket. "Then look now." Mara stayed through the repairs. At first she slept in the second bedroom, the one Silas had built for a wife he had imagined but never met. She kept the valise beneath the bed and woke at every sound. Silas did not ask her to stop. He left the lamp burning in the hall and made coffee before dawn. In April, she took over the accounts for the ranch. In May, she taught the neighbors' daughters how to read a contract before signing it. In June, she rode to Laramie and opened a small office beside the courthouse where families could bring land papers without paying Rusk's former clerks. Silas learned that Mara sang while mending shirts, though she stopped whenever he entered the room. He learned to wait in the doorway until she began again. One evening, as the sun lowered behind the red cliffs, Mara found him repairing a gate with the blue ribbon tied around his wrist. "You have kept that a long time," she said. "It has been useful." "It is frayed." "So am I." She stood beside him. The wind carried the smell of sage and warm earth. In the distance, the creek had broken free of the ice. "I received a letter today," she said. "From whom?" "The newspaper in Cheyenne. They want an account of what happened." "Will you write it?" "I think so." "What will you call it?" Mara looked at the valley, the fences rising again, the first green pushing through the soil. "Proof," she said. Silas nodded. She touched the ribbon at his wrist. "You know, I never came to this ranch to marry you." "I know. I came because your letter made you sound lonely enough to be harmless. That is the kindest insult I have received." She smiled. "And now you know better." "I do." She reached for his hand. He turned it palm up. The rope burned from the river still marked his skin, a pale line crossing the old calluses. "I am not certain I know how to be somebody's wife," she said. "I am not certain I know how to be somebody's husband." "That is not reassuring." "No, but it is honest." Mara stepped closer. "Honesty is a poor roof in winter." "Then we will build a better roof." She kissed him before he could answer. It was not a dramatic kiss. It was careful, almost questioning, and when it ended neither of them moved away. Behind them, the repaired barn smelled of fresh pine. The gate stood straight. In the pasture, the mare lifted her head and gave a low, contented sound. Mara rested her forehead against Silas's. "Do you still want a bride?" He looked at the woman who had arrived without gloves, without sleep, and without any reason to believe the world would be kind. She had found her way through the wilderness carrying proof for people who might never know her name. She had fired when it mattered. She had returned when returning hurt. "I want you," he said. "The rest can be learned." They married in September beneath a cottonwood turning gold. Abel Pritchard came from Fort Laramie and wiped his spectacles 3 times before admitting he was crying. The mother from the overhang brought bread. Sheriff Calloway, no longer a sheriff, stood at the edge of the gathering with his hat in both hands and left before anyone could thank him. Mara wore a plain brown dress. Around her wrist was a new blue ribbon. Silas wore no fine coat, only a clean shirt and the old silver button from Ruth's sewing box, stitched near his heart. When the minister asked if she would have him, Mara looked at Silas instead of the man holding the book. "I already did," she said. The valley laughed softly, and Silas's eyes shone. Months later, the ranch became a place where travelers found coffee, dry blankets, and a woman who read every document before anyone signed it. Mara woke to Silas listening at the window. She slipped her arms around him, and he covered her hands with his own. A cradle stood beside the stove, waiting for the child they had not yet named. Years later, people would say the wilderness brought them together. Mara knew better. It had only taken away every false choice. They had chosen one another in the cold, and kept choosing, until the house held 2 cups, a blue ribbon, and a girl asleep beneath the sound of the creek. Next time, we will tell the story of a deaf woman sent to a remote ranch because her family was ashamed of her, and the blind rancher who recognized her worth before she spoke a single word. Until then, keep a light in the window for someone still trying to find the road home.